Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of Narrative, The Road to 100 with Black AI Media. I am Cedric Scott Jr., your host, and I'm excited to get into another interview with somebody else that's amazing doing work in the space. We really just want to open up the space and allow folks to come in to be able to share holistically what's happening in the world of tech and AI across our global Black community. And with that, we're very excited to continue to come back and offer these interviews, all of the resources, and for all the continued support. Thank you for everybody out there. So I'm happy to be joined today with Pierre DeBois. Give us a quick introduction, tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll jump into our questions.
Okay, great. Happy to be here. I've been in business for 15 years, started with analytics and still with analytics as we talk today. My background is a very kind of a little bit diverse one. Born in Gary, Indiana, so just outside Chicago. I had a very deep passion for automobiles and still do, which led into being a design engineer at Ford Motor Company for 8 years. Decided I wanted to try to do something more at venture capital. That was my lofty goal back in the day, but didn't quite get to that point. Did complete my MBA from Georgia Tech, but I still had to kind of do a little searching on what I wanted to get involved with. And the thing that got me interested in technology was analytics. I worked with businesses on improving their digital marketing through looking at their Google Analytics or creating data models, which helps them on forecasts and operations. So that's where R programming and Python comes into play. And that became sort of the catalyst or replacement for my interest in venture capital because I found that I could have a better conversation with business owners on how they operate, marketing, and helping them make really good investment decisions along the way. And so that gives me a lot of pride and joy. And like I said, I've been doing this now for about 15 years and loving every minute of it.
And we're glad to have you and definitely excited to jump into your narrative and hear about the work that you're doing. I want to lead with our driving question, though, that I'm asking all of our guests here for the Road to 100, which is what does narrative mean to you?
Narrative is about taking the elements of events that have happened along the way and trying to come up with some sort of level of story. Technically, storytelling and narrative to me has like two major differences. Storytelling, you have a beginning, middle, and end, which is it's supposed to make some sort of point. Narrative is a little bit more, it's a little looser, but you're still taking events that have happened along the way to kind of give some sort of vibe, if you will, some sort of feeling about what you're trying to do and what the mission is about. You see that a little bit more with some of the nonprofits. If you really listen to commercials, ads, or even podcasts, basically. But a narrative, I think, is important. I think it's important for Black professionals in general and for Black people in general, because this is how we stay connected. We are 14% of the population in the United States, but it's not even 14% in every state. And we connect with each other now, particularly online, as a way of sharing narrative, kind of sharing that there's a shared experience and having some sort of understanding. And right now, we know that our stories we need to kind of control that narrative now more than ever, because in our past, we know the narrative was not really controlled by us in every instance. So narrative is a big, important part of it. It may not seem like it when you wake up and roll out of the bed in the morning, but it is an important part of how you communicate or what your actions are that you plan to do.
And I would wholeheartedly have to agree. And really, I think you hit on kind of the premise of what is happening right now in this conversation. We're realizing that within media, within the scope of anything that's shared broadly, news, when it comes to our narrative, how we're portrayed, or just the stories or anything related to how we are positioned, it's definitely imperative that we take the reins on that and drive what we know the truth to actually be. So I'm glad you brought that point up, because that's definitely the intent and purpose here. And you mentioned a little bit about your background. You talked about your MBA from Georgia Tech and things like that. And I want to get into leading up to your work now in terms of your company, organization, and what you're doing in academia. But can you tell us just like a little bit more about your journey as it pertains to tech and the AI space, and how you got started, kind of what led you to where you are today whenever it comes to the space?
Good. That's a good question. And like I said, my narrative has been one with a lot of ups and downs, in and out. But the constant theme that comes from my narrative is the interest in engineering. And it took some years to kind of figure this out. When I was a young boy, my interest was automobiles. And like I said earlier, it still is. I still love cars to death. I wanted to work in the car industry. I remember when I was a little boy, I told my mom I wanted to be a car salesman. She said, "Well, did you want to sell cars or do you want to make cars?" So she had to explain to me what engineering was. And for me, it was just A to B. It's like, ooh, okay, let's do that more than anything else. And I made cardboard cars when I was a young boy too. That I used to make model cars based off of like a 1983 Ford Thunderbird Turbo Coupe. And actually, one of the cardboard cars I wish I still had was a Buick Grand National Regal. I miss that bad boy very much. But that interest sparked a lot of curiosity about how vehicles are engineered. And just curiosity, I think, is a big part of, I think, anyone should have if they're looking at technology. You can't just, there's a lot of details, but you cannot just recite it just to recite it. You have to kind of understand why people are doing it and why certain things are important. Just like if it's just like if you went for a drink and you're trying to find whiskey, there's whiskey just like you would get at a grocery store, and then there's whiskey with a history of how the grain was picked up and that type of thing. So your narrative needs to play into a little bit of curiosity, and that curiosity should be leading you to understand what it is that you want to connect to. And for me, it was automobiles. And as I said earlier, um, part of the reason I left Ford was because I didn't want to go into strategic thing is I didn't really want to go into management at the time. There were some things with management that I did not like. And I also knew that from a practical standpoint, staying in the job too long gets you signed up for a layoff, in all honesty. And sure enough, before I went off to grad school, and my initial grad school was Carnegie Mellon before Georgia Tech, but it was about 2001. By the time I left out of Ford, sure enough, the year after there was a big layoff. And I can tell you from my Facebook, there's a lot of people that I know from Ford that are no longer within Ford. Some of that's just retirement, but some of those people had left out at that time because they saw a big sweep. So you have to stay alert, I think, as a technologist. Again, goes back to curiosity. Staying alert, understanding where people are going to, and just kind of going, kind of like sailing. You take your sail out and you kind of go with the wind. You have to kind of pay attention to how your boat is oriented to stay afloat.
Yep. And so thinking about where we are right now with the work that you're doing today, you have a company and you are doing a lot of work the data realm. So can you
Yes.
introduce that to us and to tell us about your company, the work that you're doing there, and then we'll dig a little bit more into that and kind of unpack things as we go along.
Okay, great. Well, my business, Zimana, is pretty much a service with small businesses and sometimes large businesses. But the big core at it is taking data and trying to figure out some sort of narrative around the data. Data has changed everything in technology because instead of having to learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which you still do if you want to build a website, let's face it, or an app, have some familiarity to it, data sort of has value when you understand the context around it. Brief example would be like stats for football or the NBA. You have a lot of stats around players, but you kind of need to understand which stats are important to be able to tell the story of how well a player is playing in the league during the year. So for my company, what I do is I help businesses in two ways. The story that I unpack for them is that number one, they may have data around Google Analytics, things where they're trying to figure out online how well their digital marketing is allowing their message to connect with customers. So I help them to understand where their digital ads have been doing well, whether their SEO, where their search has been doing well. And there's some things we can do with tags with physical advertising, like outdoor billboards. You can actually, there are ways of having a landing page attached to that and have an analytics tag that will help you understand if people are really viewing those billboards and then going to search up that billboard on their mobile phone. So there's that piece of it. The second piece, and the one I'm also really, really proud of, deals more with R and Python. That's data modeling. I need to briefly explain that. When you're trying to get a narrative around your data, a lot of it deals with statistics. And these are things that really has been with us, not just, collective as Black professionals, but even mankind. It's really been out there for decades. We just never really had a database and access to play with data and create these data models to make prediction models, basically. So what I do for clients there is I actually will work with them on their data to come up with a data model that will fit that'll fit the question they're trying to answer in terms of the things they're trying to forecast. It could be a forecast demand, it could be a time series forecast, it could be a regression to figure out which features correlate with each other, basically. But these sort of techniques have been around for decades, but now with the cloud and broader access to data, you can actually create data models and help people create a lot more analysis. And we're going to see even more of that now with AI being part of the picture as well too. That's actually a big part of it.
Awesome, yeah. In your business, the name Zimana
Yeah.
Analytics, the word Zimana, is there reasoning behind choosing that? Does it mean something specifically for
That's a
you?
terrific question. It's kind of a two-pronged question. The big part of it is it's simulation and analysis put together with the letter Z at the front. That's all
Mm,
really it is. At the time when I was, particularly for online, I really had to sit down and think about this, about how to stand out. And for branding, to be honest with you, I kind of reversed it a little bit. A lot of people jump to the letter A, they just the letter B, and that type of stuff. I jumped to the letter Z because nobody really jumps to that very easily, to be honest with you. And I did a little check, make sure that I wasn't appropriating somebody's culture by selecting it. So I know somebody African whose first name was Zamana, but not someone very, very famous. I did actually I found a restaurant named Zimana as well too later on. But for me, it was picking something that would stand out. And this is for branding. I think if you're going to start a business, you need to stand out very, very much at the beginning. And you need to hit them hard, because otherwise your business will flounder over time because people will not remember you as easily. And that's why I picked that.
interesting. Yeah, so simulation and analysis with the Z on the front. Very cool. Okay,
Yes.
I was curious. I saw it and I was like, "Is this cultural? Like, what? Is this have something to do with your background?" But
Yeah.
I'm actually glad I asked that question. Thinking about Zimana Analytics, what was the motivation behind launching that particular type of entity, and focusing on the analytics part? Like, was there something that you saw, that you knew that there was going to be a need in that area particularly, or did your engineering brain kick in somehow and figure out, well, this is the wave to move on? What was kind of the push behind that, and how did that come to fruition?
It was part of my dream for working. I wanted to work particularly with African American businesses, but I wanted to come at it in a very unique way. Part of also the other reason with Samana was I like that you know that there was something a little felt that there was something cultural about it. That part actually was playing. It was coming into play as well too. I want something that sounded like it was resonating with people, but I also was very careful about a couple of angles. Working with Black-owned businesses online, I think is a little different than in the physical. And here's what I mean by this: it's online tends to mask a lot of things with how you present. And my three major concerns were making sure that I was working with people and not against their interests. That's a big one, and you have to kind of signal that without really holding a sign saying, "Hey, hi, I'm Pierre DeBois. I'm not going to work against the interests." You have to kind of really signal that in how you do things. Second is, and this was a little bit trickier, you can still be a great person for the diaspora, so to speak, but still might have a business idea that's not quite uh, together. And I've met those quite a bit at the very beginning. It's a little different now. I think most people are a little more, they act more at platforms. I think there's a certain seriousness that comes to it. But I can have a whiskey and a conversation in another podcast about how many people came to me and they weren't horrible, but the problem is that the business model wasn't thought out very well, and they were unwilling to do the work behind it. That's the key, and that's hard to spot that from behind the scenes. And then I think the third part of it is, uh, like I said, I mentioned alluded to before, we're 14% of the population. I want something that would speak to us and at the same time still bridge a broader audience. And most business owners think this way. They kind of do. You'll talk to some people and they're like, well, I don't want to serve the community. I want to serve everybody else. And I think that's okay. But at the same time, you need to figure out how to service your community where you can. And with analytics, I kind of thought this was a very unique opportunity because analytics is the data behind it, the math behind it is not really a cultural thing, but being willing to give information and being able to help people with information is. It's a way of how we should be communicating to each other. And usually I was very subtle about certain things at the very beginning. I'm not sure I'm going to be subtle coming into 2025, unfortunately, but I've been subtle about it because it's still, you can have a mission for something, but if you're not careful, sometimes that if you focus too much on that mission, sometimes you're kind of missing some other things that you kind of need to address. And I think it was important for me to kind of figure out how to work with people without coming across as I'm going to compete against you. And that has worked very well, to be honest with you, surprisingly well. It's a matter of, there was an incubator in Chicago, just to give you a quick example. And it's no longer here, unfortunately, Blue 1647. They had a loft that they eventually moved into, and then unfortunately, because of COVID, they shut down because all the incubators had to shut down for a while. Of course, you're aware of that. But being part of that incubator for those several years, I think it was at least 5. It was a big boost not only for my business, but it was good to be able to be around other Black business owners who you can kind of talk to and share community and help with resources and help in terms of guidance. And it was going in both ways, so it was instructional for me as well as a privilege for me to be of help as well. So there's a lot of those things that you have to kind of look out for, particularly if you are a Black technologist, and trying to figure out how do you make the connection. So that way you're not just, you're really creating value, and you're not just, you're really connecting with people rather than just coming in with something that may not be really thought out very well, or shilling something that just is not cool. So there you go.
It's that's something I've consistently heard from folks who have definitely seen some success is realizing that the collaborative aspect of things is really supportive and going beyond just what they say is like some of these catchphrases in terms of you want to go fast, go by yourself. You want to go far, go together. But I've heard some great stories similar to what you just shared about actual practical situations and scenarios where people have put that into practice and they're now on the other side of it and saying, well, this is how that implementation actually helped me. So I'm glad that you shared that here on the platform. And I actually wanted to ask a few more questions, I think, related to Zimana and that build out, because I think what's really important and impactful is not only just the aspect of the business building component, but it's interesting because I don't necessarily think that I've had very many conversations specifically with folks who are mostly focused in like the data analytics space whenever it comes to some of the backend processes and when we're looking at technology. People are building things and creating, but the actual analytics and looking at the ones and zeros, if you will, sometimes are not necessarily as talked about because maybe that's just not as we'll say sexy. And so I want to dig into that and talk a little bit more. So related to that, though, are there any current insights that you can share about Zimana, things that you might be working on that you're really excited about, and how do you see those things making a difference as you're supporting business owners?
Yeah, I right now we're in a transitional phase quite a bit because of the AI aspect. I need to explain this a little bit more. I think for 15 years I've worked as a service, basically. That's how I saw analytics. That may be changing quite a bit because a lot of the AI tools can take some of that weight of getting certain tasks done, which means you don't work as a service provider, but it just means that you may need to provide tools to let people do that. Right now, I'm at work on a couple of tools and platforms as we speak. But the part that I'm really more interested in is teaching. I'm an adjunct for Trine University. I'm teaching on using Tableau, and I'm actually working on developing a course for another university right now. And there may be couple of online courses that I will develop down the line too. I'm finding that more and more people, that curiosity that I mentioned about earlier, that seems to be sparking with people a little bit more than what it used to be 15 years ago, which it should be. This is how technology evolves. But I think the challenge now is now that people are curious, how do you ground that or guide that so that way they can get some value out of it? And that's what, if you think about any university experience, that's what that's about. It's giving you the chance to take these elements and say, okay, how do I operate as a professional? Whether you are interested in the law, whether you're interested in the health field, whether you're interested in engineering, whether you're interested in business, or in public policy. These are institutions or directions that are getting a little bit of a remake with AI, and that's going to change the skill sets that we need to bring into play. One developer I thought was a really good comment. He said that the most important language is becoming the English language now in programming, not just C or R or Python because of the fact that you're using natural language. You have to not only make a prompt, but figure out how to explain that prompt. What's the chain of thought? What's the reasoning that you want your AI to work with to produce a object that you need? And that part is a fascinating part. It's a big changer for programming because you are working with syntax in a different way. You're actually describing it, but you still need to have some working knowledge of how to describe it in such that the AI can deliver for you. So for my business right now, we're looking at, how can we teach some of that as well to help uplift not only the business owner, but also provide some tools that will help them as well. And I think that would help quite, and I'm really excited about that because it will hit not only business owners, but maybe even some people in the nonprofit as well.
I definitely think that the educational component of it is definitely necessary, particularly thinking about AI implementation and what that looks like across industries. So I'm glad that you're at the helm and jumping into that. And you're going to be somebody who's going to be able to lead some of those things because there's a lot of work to be done. And I think breaking things down into kind of digestible pieces is going to be very helpful and beneficial in the long run for a lot of folks who might just be getting started. Were there any unique challenges that you faced during the course of your work, and how did you overcome those things?
The big part one was working remote. I started in 2009, so you can kind of imagine, we hear about working remote now, particularly after COVID. But before COVID, and even going back to 2009, there were some small business owners that worked well remote, but not everybody did, and that became a little bit of a challenge. The challenge is that most people presume that the work that you do needs to be in front of them. And that's not entirely right, particularly for when you talk about programming, it's a little different. Programmers are used to sitting down in front of a laptop and being in the corner for a while, and trying to think through about, how do we approach this before sitting down with clients a little bit. Web designers also have that same aspect as well. And the problem is that the majority of business owners during that time really didn't understand, they understand making the donuts, for lack of a better term. And so they understand dough, they understand, what flour did you use? Did you use eggs, how the donuts were made, and they understand cashiers physically bringing the donut to the customer. Dealing with technology takes a little bit of imagination about how it can be used. Otherwise, there's a lot of tools that we would not have here today. Look at things like quickly, for example, a lot of people talk about Excel, and I know Excel is not like the pinnacle of technology. It's a spreadsheet, and even people wrote about, every year the spreadsheet is dying, Excel is dying. But there's always someone that comes up with some sort of plugin or some sort of new application where the spreadsheet has value. Whether it's something as simple as turning it to the CSV file, or for Microsoft, the plugin for Python, allowing you to run Python code right within the spreadsheet table. So it takes a little bit of imagination, and it's harder for businesses to do that if it's not an engineered product. If you really stop and think about it, our software, AI, even a website, if you stop and think about it, is software. And anything that's in that realm is really an engineered product. It's just very, very two-dimensional. I always like to say it's like a two-dimensional Corvette. When you see a Corvette Z01, if you're a sports car, you really, yeah, I could get into that. I understand it. It's a two-seater. It has so much space. It's a V8, and now in the mid-engine. There's things that even the common person could kind of appreciate, even if you, the car enthusiast, has to explain it. There's still some common pieces they will remember. Fast forward to software, very two-dimensional. It's sometimes hard for people to understand why, like a browser, I had to explain to somebody why a browser could still show a web page even though we weren't on Wi-Fi. It's because there was downloading of files and there was instruction for that browser to show that web page. Sometimes people are getting better at it, but there's still the imagination is kind of hard. I think this is why so many debates about social media safety, things like data privacy and that type of thing, it's hard to imagine because data is such a squishy, two-dimensional subject. It's just very, very, the tangentials are not always as physically imaginable as, say, a refrigerator, a house, a car. Things are technology. These are all technologies, technically, that frankly we benefit from. We just don't call it that because we have a name for it, you know. So, so I think that that was a challenge for me is trying to explain what analytics was at the beginning, what the value was. It was a new technology, but you know, like any other new technology, you have to explain it. And if you're in business, that explaining aspect can sometimes slow down the transaction a lot. People take time to think about it. They have to know, how is this helping me? And it takes a lot to really get through that. If something is new, that a lot of people get you the enthusiasts will understand it, but your common person may not understand what the value is, and you have to slog through trying to really connect with people. And that took a while, to be honest with you. That took a while at the very beginning. That's why you hear about even large companies like Amazon, how they have this long private equity runway for capital. It's because it took some things really do take that long to get off the ground, and not everybody is on board with that. You have to kind of be ready for that idea.
And how difficult was that process kind of for you in the initial rollout? Did you ever get to a point where you were like, I think I'm just too early? Or like what was the thinking whenever it came to having to actually go through the process of explanation, breaking things down, and then getting to a point of, all right, this is the business aspect of it, right? Here's the now we get to the donuts. So can you tell me
Yeah,
about your thinking during that whole time frame?
that the big thinking for me, there were kind of two parts of this. I wanted to do an analytics business for about a year. And in fact, I'll tell this story. I actually was hired um, for 6 months. I worked at a ad agency. Didn't know it was an ad agency. I just knew it was advertising. Harvest Media, because I wasn't sure if analytics was going back to what I was talking about earlier. I wasn't sure if analytics was quite the right fit. People were still just getting used to having a website, and Google Analytics was coming into play, and people were starting to understand how to do Google Ads at that time and a little bit with SEO. So there was some traction there, but there were no numbers that were showing initially how much people were willing to spend. And that's the part I think as an entrepreneur you need to be looking for. I think most with technology now, the glorious thing is that you have a way of developing a platform and actually providing a service or a tool. There are a ton of ways to do this now, more so than when I started. I think that's a great thing. And I think for Black business owners, it's a terrific moment because you don't have to marshal resources in those same vein that we used to, and that's always been sort of a handicap for black business owners. It's why people tend to take certain things that weren't really that might seem like they draw some money in, but it really doesn't really build capital. But what did it for me was that Harvest really did not understand. They didn't understand analytics, to be honest with you. To be blunt, within 6 months, my team was I was one of the people among some people that were laid off. Welcome. I had moved to New York for this, so welcome to New York. But the thing was, I kept my website up as a just in case. The big advice I would give to anybody: don't shut down your business immediately. Don't let anyone force you to shut it down. If you getting picked up by somebody, work with them for a few months and see how it goes before you start taking things apart, because you can find that within 6 months it wasn't a match. And this was one of those moments actually. But the neat thing was I still kind of kept my eye open, and I found numbers which showed that people were spending on websites and on online presence. That number was not analytics, but analytics at that time was really associated with website design development and also with for e-commerce event. E-commerce was budding, but still there. But the point is, as an entrepreneur, you have to kind of define you need to know what your market is more than anything else. Because then when you go to get investment, or if you're doing it, I bootstrap pretty much from start to finish. But no matter how you decide to do financing your business, you need something that tells you that people are spending X, Y, and Z, and then gives you a trend that says that spending is increasing. Think of it as a wave, and you need to jump on it. Don't get upset that you didn't jump on it immediately. To your question earlier, but definitely because sometimes it's not clear how to put things together. But eventually, you need to keep an eye open for that. And I think at some point you need to stay near, the opening of that wave. So that way, if it's going to longer than 2 or 3 years, you're going the best is 5 years. Honestly, I think that's what you want to look for, because then you have enough time to not only build your business There's going to be some things you may need to adjust, and you will have some time to make that adjustment, basically. You'll have a fighting chance, basically. You'll have some competition too, but competition doesn't always take you out. It's more the little things that you do as a business owner internally that will make or break your survival. And you need to have, and part of the thing you need to do is identifying what market is and figuring it out. Like I said, it's not easy, um, but even if you get something tangential, like how people are spending online, that might give you a clue if your solution is a fit for that. And kind of you can at least sell that, to, if not to a customer, maybe to a partner who you partner up with.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and yeah, you're offering a lot of amazing insights, I think, related to building a business, and then also just thinking about the kind of the bridge from the more brick and mortar, three-dimensional physical space things, and then going into where we are in the digital. Because I think that we definitely do have a lot of folks. I mean, of course, myself included, Black AI Media, right? Building in more of a digital sphere, things that are based online, platform focused. So I think what you're sharing with us is highly valuable. So if people are listening, I hope they're taking notes, and if not, rewind this and make sure they get those pieces of information, because that was extremely, I would say, just beneficial for anybody tuning in. And I'm going to make sure I go back and get that for myself. So thank you for sharing that. And we talked about a little bit of the challenges and some of the things that have been a little bit more difficult. I want to pivot a little bit more though, and thinking a little bit more about the favorable aspects of things. So have there been any really exciting outcomes from your work and with your business in Zimana that you've seen? And we're thinking about looking in the future. Are you starting to think about long-term goals over the next 5 years and going forward?
Right now, as far as I think the interesting thing is that the tool sets that are coming out are fascinating. I'm actually using Cursor right now, which is a AI IDE, very much built around Visual Studio Code. In fact, there's quick aside, there's like 5 different IDEs all built around Visual Studio Code. I still don't quite understand how Microsoft decided to have an open source version of Visual Studio Code where you can build off of that. But apparently that seems to be the rage. There's actually one called Positron, which is used for R programming. And the irony is that it was launched by the same company that created R Studio, which is another IDE that's used for R and Python, so and Julia quite a bit. But Cursor, I think, is a really unique play because going back to what I said earlier with AI, you have the opportunity of using natural language to describe your overall code and then make corrections basically. And the thing I like about that is that it's built on, you have a couple different models you can use for that. We're going to see a lot more of these tools where it's not just an open AI, or I should say chat GPT. It's not just a Claude. It's not just a Llama model, but you can actually switch between models. If you look at Hugging Face, for example, they have a chat bot that will let you test out different models as a chat, basically. So we're going to see much more of that as an option to give people some chances to figure out which model might be a better fit for something they're developing. And in some cases, if you are building an app and you're trying to add AI, you'll get a better sense of saying, Claude is really good, but maybe this Llama one was a little bit better, and back and forth and so forth. We're going to see much more of that because the options are going to be greater, and that's the part that I'm excited about. I'm also excited about how I think as people are communicating online, I think for Black people, excuse me, for Black people, there's our businesses are more like a platform. I need to explain a little bit about that. As a platform, you operate a little differently. You have different digital properties that you use to service your customer. We always known about a website. We've heard this now for like almost 20 years or so, but we have other tools now, whether it's building an app, building a chatbot, maybe with the AI behind it. And then we need, as a business, we need to coordinate around those things. So even if you're a business owner who just got their product in Target and in Walmart, I think the challenge is that you need some sort of digital platform to help your customers not only learn about the product, but even share and engage with you. Platforming is a little bit of a new thing, I think, for Black business owners in particular. Like I said, we're used to thinking like the Green Book back in the way day where people used to find other businesses when they were traveling for safety, basically knowing where to stay and that type of thing. Over the 70s, 80s, fast forward to that time, that type of thinking became more of an economic agency for us, trying to make sure the dollar is being spent within the community. The reason why I think platforms are important now is that there's two things going on. We use the internet to connect with each other. Um, whether it was, Black Twitter, unfortunately before Musk took over, basically. But that was a way of connecting with each other. And I think that's becoming more important now as people are starting to spread out for social media platforms. We need to find each other. I think that's a really big part of it. And I think the other part is that with technology, it's just the idea that once you find each other, we're used to spending online, just like everybody else does. And I think that part becomes really, really important. I'll say from my end, I had a virtual assistant in my early days who came from Kenosha, Wisconsin. And we had these exchanges just like we're talking now. And it was really cool to see that, there are places where we know where Black people are. They're in Detroit, we're in Atlanta, that type of thing, Chicago, got to go to Bronzeville, obviously. But each part of the country is a little different. And there's places where we are now that may not be traditional, or they may have had a history, but we didn't know about that history for a long time. So it's the internet has brought that together. We have to kind of figure out, how do we stay connected with each other? I think this is why platforms are important because it's part of that thinking that goes into it.
And I think those are amazing points, and really thinking about the aspect of community and what that means now and how it's evolved. Because before, as you mentioned, it was more physical. Where can I go to be in the presence or in basically congregate with folks that I can trust and we have the same values, or I know that within this business or this structure we have a common ground or understanding. Whereas now, we're essentially, I think, trying to do the same thing, but digitally, right? What websites can I go to purchase this, or I need to get whatever products, have it shipped to my house, or I need to access something online, and consuming different types of content and information that we can stand behind and trust. So it's an interesting parallel that you draw there between those two facets, the green book aspect of it, and then that the transition into the economic aspect of like your Tulsas, and now looking at it in the digital world, and these virtual spaces that we're commandeering. So that's, yeah, great way to think of it, and I'm glad you framed that.
But I'll share with you real quick. There's a Juneteenth webinar that I did a whole presentation on this quite a bit. So I'll make sure I'll send the link to you so you have that as well too. So
Well, please do. Yeah,
this was part. It was part of a Juneteenth, and I cannot remember the gentleman's name off the top. But I'm hoping they do this again this year. I think last year they didn't get a chance to do it, but I always thought it was a really good one of bringing Black technologists together. And that actually goes to my point that there are more things online for us to kind of play around with it and connect with each other. So I'll make sure I'll send that to you as well.
yeah, please do. I look forward to it. And this actually goes into my next question in some of this alignment. And we've heard some of your your personal background experience, and your interests and love for cars, how that translates into what you've done in engineering, now as a technologist, and then working in data analytics in support of other businesses. You seem that you would be a value driven individual. So, are there certain values that you really embed in the work that you're doing when you approach projects and in the work, whether that's through educational aspects or just with Zimana in general? Are there certain kind of core pillars that are always consistent throughout everything that you're doing?
There's a couple that I had to learn along the way. I think the first one is this is more of a, I joke with somebody, this is like the Batman doesn't use guns type rule, basically. It's the idea that, don't get too mad if things don't work out with people. And here's what I mean. I know that there's a lot of discussion and discourse about, people trolling and arguing online and everything else. Some arguments are not worth the yelling. They just really aren't. And I had to learn from my end a little bit too, when to not get too upset. I had a few mishaps. Again, I joke with somebody that's a whiskey and a conversation to have. And I think every business owner will have that at the very beginning, particularly if you're doing service and particularly if you're working with everyone else. And part of the reason that those things happen is because everyone comes to business for entrepreneurship with such a different aspect. It's not this, go get the MBA or work in the corporate world. You got a lot of people who have not had that experience. But their experiences are very, very valuable. They are literally, to use the Yellowstone reference, it's like the John Duttons of the world, basically, where they've invested so much in something and it's hard to kind of hold it together. But I think when you have dialogue online, you have to learn that the reasons for why they make a certain decision may not be, it's not going to be evident through a screen. I've had people cancel orders on things because they had other pieces of their business that just were not together. And you have to learn how to vet questions early. That took a little time to do. And you do it in such a way where you're not trying to be, what's the best word I want to say? You don't want to be antagonistic with somebody off the bat. It's customer service, just like you would it'd be just like if you go to any restaurant, you expect the waiter or waitress to be courteous to you, and they're going to be, even if things are kind of not, until things are going off the rails. But for the most part, they're there to make a complete experience for you. Same thing in the hospitality industry. And if you're online, you have to figure out how to take those elements and build into a really comfortable environment, so that way people can talk to you about what their concerns are. And you also have to remember that sometimes those concerns may not be precise. Someone could be just one of my favorite clients, who unfortunately was he had passed away. Is one of my earliest. He was one of my childhood friends. One of the first people I worked with. He had all these. He was a musician. He had a music studio. He had a live band that would perform in a lot of different parties and stuff. And then he had a DJ business. And this was very unheard of. He was in business earlier than I was. Really, literally, I graduated high school at 87. He started his business like, I think, 89. And so and my business didn't start to 2009. So he had experience, okay, but very professional. And the cool part was he had all these images of his DJing, of the band, and different members and people enjoying themselves. And when it came time to redesign his website, and I know a website is a little minor compared to today, we had to figure out how to get his narrative together and tell his whole story. He had just kind of put these off to the side, but these pictures were spectacular. So we had to figure out how to I had to figure out how to work with him and explain certain things, because he never really had built a website. So I say this to say, fast forward to now with AI and so many things like with prompt engineering, with the reasoning, basically, all these things are built off of white papers, and that's important. It gives, gravitas, helps you understand how these things work. But the challenge is that you now have to, if you're trying to do an AI service and selling it to John's barbershop or Jane's grocery store, they don't have that AI background, but you need to kind of tell that narrative about what the value is. So there's certain things I had to learn earlier on. I mentioned, don't get too upset about things. Stay calm. You're the one that's supposed to be setting the example. The minute that you yell at a customer, it's over with. It really is, because you're sending a message saying that they're not worth, you know, you're beneath you. And you don't want to do that. Never tell people they're stupid. If you want to educate, get to the core pieces that they understand and build from there. That's your job. Second thing I would say is, and this was a challenge I think over it, is, new technology comes into play. And we hear this all the time, but not every new technology sticks with you long term. There are Betamaxes of all sorts in software and, in any sort of technology. You have to kind of, even Steve Jobs talked about this. You have to kind of figure out where the sun rises and sunsets for a technology, and that can be hard to do. But you need to parcel off some time to do and think about that. The recommendation I would make is aim for 20% of your time to do some sort of development, and that could be a number of things. It can be, and it doesn't have to be technology either. It could be you as a chef figuring out what is the newest recipe, maybe with sriracha, that would appeal to your customers coming in. Basically, you need that 20% to develop something away from your production area, so that way you can kind of get the core pieces together and then try to figure out how to produce it. This is how automobiles are developed. Ford, General Motors, even Stellantis, every automaker has some sort of advanced engineering group that develops a core technology within a vehicle, and then they give it to the product managers on the production side, who they have to figure out how to package that technology. So for something like, I'll give you a quick example, something like anti-lock brakes, for example. The advanced engineering group would get the core functionality of how anti-lock brakes would work, or maybe an airbag, or if it's a computer system in a vehicle, how do you get to use an interface in a car? There are basic pieces that have to be developed just to get it to function. Then when you give it to a program manager, they have to get those pieces to fit within the function of within a certain platform. So if you are developing the Mustang versus the F series, you have only so much space for certain sensors, and you have to figure out and test and make sure those sensors work according to the design of your vehicle. In business, we have the same thing now, thanks to AI, data, software. There's all these different things that we have to be able to develop and figure out how to make it work within our business. And you need some time away from that to do that. 20% is a good bogey to work with.
So you mentioned too, going into so thinking about future developments and kind of what you're preparing for now, kind of thinking about what's next for you, for your work, for Zimana. And one of the things that you talked about a little bit was basically educating, creating some coursework that could really have an impact on business owners, on folks, anybody who really engages with it, and also figuring out how the AI technology is going to kind of play a role in what you present to folks. Can you share, I guess, anything about that without necessarily having to give it all away, of course, but what, kind of what your preparation looks like and just thinking about what's next for you in the future in that current project in particular, as I know that that's what you're looking forward to deploying very soon.
Yeah, I'm looking. This was an app idea that, to be honest with you, it's kind of going back to the whole arc of everything. Wasn't sure how this was going to work, basically, but thanks to a little bit with AI, I'll share a little bit with AI, a little bit with different software packages. It was easier to select features for certain things and then know and kind of get closer to what my mind was wrapping around. Like I said, we have a lot of platforms out here and a lot of tools, but you need to also sit down with a whiteboard or whether it's electronic, it could be a Miro or a Mermaid, which is actually that's a really good flow chart framework that you can use to kind of get those pieces together. But the challenge I think right now is that for the future, what we're hoping to do is to do a little bit more a split between education and then have some tools that will let people kind of educate themselves around a little bit more. Things that help people to identify cash flow within a business. That's actually one of the things we're working on. And then we have a few others that were originally supposed to be apps, but one of the concerns was that, how do we set up a database and how do we set up privacy? That's a big deal. But I think there's more of this there's more of these mid-size options now that make it easier for you to carry a lot of data within a portable package. And that part, I think, will be that part is a sweet spot for us as well. And I think that's something that everybody's going to play around with a lot more. We've heard all the things with AI, we heard all the things with what it can do. And I think this year will be the year of the use cases taking shape. And we're seeing some things right now that are helping in terms of prompt engineering, in terms of agentic AI, the idea of having agents work on a system of things. I think we're going to see much more of that. But from my end of it, I think it's going to be a little bit more of just trying to get some basic tools together more for small businesses. And then also doing a little bit more in the education part. Like I said earlier, it's something that I think has evolved because of the fact that we have more technology and more things to use. But as a business owner, you need or entrepreneur, I think the challenge is trying to figure out, at what point am I over educating myself or over investing in something? And I think that's the part that I think that is a little bit missing from everything, ranging from where you talk about crypto to even to just simple products and services. I think we have a good handle of it, and we're hoping to have something out here very, very soon.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask at least just one question related to data privacy, which I know is really an important topic, as it relates to just everything that we're doing right now, whether that's social media, whether that's online digital business, whatever we're doing. If we're doing anything that deals with a screen or anything with programming or something on the back end of it, there's something to do with data. And I think a lot of concern, of course, has come out just related to privacy and protection. So are there any, I guess, kind of general suggestions or thoughts that you can offer that the general public, business owners, that we should just know related to protecting our data?
I think the number one thing is understanding permission flow among your customers. When are you asking for permission? When are you updating them? There's a tendency that sometimes when we introduce these apps and tools, we're kind of almost in the developer mindset about, oh, as long as I just have this, checkbox here, this is fine. People don't operate that way entirely. They know that they need to have an app on their phone, but there's a lot of apps on the phone right now, and that means a lot of notifications. You have to figure out, I think there's a lot of noise around that, and as a, I think now what people should be thinking about is what is the permission flow within my, going back to what I was saying about platforms and everything else, what is the permission flow for customers to use my products and services? Because that permission flow is where you need to indicate very simply, this is where we use data. This is where we don't use data. Right now, everyone is trying to reboot what they have right now because of AI, because of the reach of AI, being able to bring for an AI agent to access all these data points or data tables or databases. And the problem with data when you start talking about privacy is that you can have one data element or observation from one column, and neither one could personally identify you. But if you bring that information together, you actually are treating it as a personally identifiable information. Even for something simple like with blogs, for example, I have a tendency to digitize the license plate. If I take a picture of something, I had this thing when I started to take natural pictures and try to blog and that type of thing. But I would digitize the plate because the plate, technically, you are identifying somebody online and you don't have permission to do that. So those little things, I think, are things that you can start asking a question on as a business. Even if you don't have the technology background, you should be asking the question, when my customer signs on to an app or signs on to join us for a subscription, um, how are we telling that customer about how we're using data, and what are the things that, what's the consent that's happening, and then what if they want to opt out, what's the opt out? And I think understanding that is a good starting point, because then you can now work with, even if you don't have the background for it, you still can work with your technology team to ask hard questions, say, hey, what can we do to improve here at this point? That's the part that you want to do. You want to get very, very specific if you can.
Yeah, we appreciate that, because it's definitely a conversation consistently that goes in a lot of different directions, ebbs and flows when it comes to data. And of course, everybody has their viewpoint, and definitely wanted to hear your thoughts, and just that suggestion as far as the flow of permissions is being a focal point for a lot of us is, I think, a great just piece for us to take away. So I appreciate that. And we'll get ready to close out here. And again, appreciate your time. I'm going to ask you to just have one last question before you let the folks know where they can follow you or check out your work or even become a client. And it's related to legacy. And we really want to think about, beyond us looking into the future, what we're actually producing and what impact that could potentially have on the world. So my question finally here to you is, what legacy do you hope that your work leaves behind in the space, in the world, whether that's directly through Zimana or just you as a person, Pierre DeBois?
That's a good question. I've been thinking about this a little bit lately, more so because legacy, I think, changes for people as you get a little older. I'll say this a little bit. One legacy I think I want to leave is something where Black business owners have a resource that they can work with, and a legacy where, for myself, it's a little bit. I think I'm happy with things I've gotten done. There's some things I still would like to do, and I'm trying to, of course, with it being almost the new year, it's something you think about quite a bit. But I think for legacy, I think the biggest one I want to leave is for things I think in terms of, what direction, what's the narrative that Black people should be carrying as they consider themselves for being entrepreneurship, consider themselves for business. Politics, I think, is going to be always a hard one. I told somebody privately, it's always a last mile problem because we're threading the needle about who we think support, and it don't provide as much support. But I want to leave a legacy there also in terms of, why people take certain directions the way that they do. The thing that I get a little disappointed with, I'm not a Trump supporter, obviously, but the thing that I'm disappointed with is the idea that there's folks that still think that despite they're so wrapped up about cryptocurrency and very specific things that they're not looking at how the engagement is within the community and how they still have a role with that, basically. And I feel like that's been kind of encouraged under the Trump administration. Unfortunately, there's you want to work together. There's nothing wrong with being independent and striking a blow for certain things, but I think for a legacy, I want people to understand that you still need to stay connected for a reason. It's part of a larger picture, a larger dynamic of trying to that not only serves the community well, but it ultimately serves you well at the heart. So I hope those things. I'm working to kind of see if I can put those things together in something more concrete. But that's where my mind has been for the last,
And those are great thoughts related to just again the work that you're doing, what you want to leave behind, what you want the world to essentially be. We all want to leave it better than we found it. Again, I just want to say that I just have really thoroughly appreciated your insights, all the things that you've shared. Please take a moment, share with everybody who is tuning in where they can connect with you, where they can get in touch, follow your work, and also, again, potentially become clients and patrons of your business.
Zimana has a dedicated LinkedIn page, and we are in the process of updating our website. Our website, to be honest, I know we've talked a lot about websites, but I'll admit our website has been a little behind the last year or two. But we are in the process of updating it and updating it with new product as well. But I would say if you want to find me, LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn heavily. Was on Twitter. I'm actually one of those people who are making a decision to go towards Blue Ski. And Clubhouse, I do kind of pop in on Clubhouse a little bit, but I'm also questioning a little bit on the live audio apps a little bit. Whole different story, but I'm not. But I would say LinkedIn is the safe bet, and Instagram is the best bet as well too. Threads as well. All these are pretty much. You'll find a business page for each one of those, and then on Facebook, I also have a personal. I wouldn't say a personal business page. I'm not sure that's the right way to say it, but I do have a business. There's a Zimana page for Zimana Analytics, and there's a business page for me. And I use that to kind of give a little bit more or general thoughts for things that entrepreneurs can work with. Whereas Zimana is pretty much you'll find a lot of tips for analytics on there as well. Get in contact with us. We give clients a 30-minute kind of an initial session just to kind of talk a little bit about what your concerns are. Because like I said earlier, most people struggle a little bit to get to the heart of it. So we try to kind of get to the gist of it. And then we give people a written contract to kind of outline what the work we're going to do for you. So get in contact. You guarantee good service and great thought, and your business will help you to get your business get boosted and get towards the right customers, and do it in a way that's ethically sound as well.
Well, there you have it, everybody. Make sure you get in contact for sure. And thank you, Pierre, once again. It's just been a wonderful time to sit with you. And for everybody tuning in to this edition of Narrative, The Road to 100 at Black AI Media, thank you all for continuing to come back. If you are new to the platform, this is the first episode that you've watched an interview, go back and check out the others. You'll definitely see some great insights there. Check out all the resources, even some great merchandise, whatever we got going on. Check those things out. But we appreciate everybody's support. And with that, everybody, a wonderful day and be blessed. Peace.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Rise and shine, it's our time to shine. Black AI Media, we're breaking the line. Voices loud, technology loud. Unifying power, lifting up the crowd.